Welcome to Stepping Toward Justice with Sarah A. Ford, a podcast where we'll explore what justice really looks like inside of a courtroom, outside in our communities, and where access to justice is lacking. We'll focus on victims and survivors. We'll talk with advocates, changemakers, all working to make justice a reality for us all. Our system was not created with victims in mind. But as we draw attention to these issues that affect victims and survivors daily, we can acknowledge and understand what's happening. And once we do, we can move towards change. So let's take a step together toward justice. A case you may have heard something about is the state of South Carolina versus Bowen Turner, a young man accused of sexually assaulting 3 young women in 2018 and 2019. Turner was accused of sexually assaulting a young woman in the spring of 2018. After investigation and meeting with the prosecutor's office, the victim and family were led to believe that there wasn't enough evidence to successfully prosecute the charge. Moving forward to October 2nd, 2018, when Dallas Stoller was allegedly sexually assaulted by the same person, Bowen Turner, who was eventually charged with sexual assault in January of 2019. In early 2019, his lawyers petitioned for the court to remove his ankle monitor, which was a part of his bond condition for his release. The ankle monitor was removed on April 22nd, 2019. 41 days later, Chloe Bess was the 3rd young woman to accuse Bowen Turner of rape in just over a year. The trauma and bullying these young women endured at the hands of a community rallying behind Bowen Turner was tremendous. From changing schools to even moving out of state, these young women were nothing short of terrorized. Both Dallas Stoller and Chloe Bess awaited the prosecution of these cases against Bowen Turner, but he was represented by a Lori legislator, Senator Brad Hutto, who was protected from being forced to try cases while he was in session at the South Carolina General Assembly. On November 14, 2021, Dallas Stoller succumbed to a self-inflicted wound and died. On April 8th, 2022, the Bamberg County case against Bowen Turner involving Dallas Stoller was dismissed on the very same day that Bowen Turner was allowed to plead guilty to assault and battery first for the state's recommendation of probation in the case involving Chloe Bess, without even requiring mandatory sex offender registration. Bess appealed for a violation of her constitutional victims' rights. But in a not very surprising move, less than a month later, Bowen Turner was arrested for disorderly conduct, minor in possession of alcohol, and threatening the life of a public official, all charges which are still pending in Orangeburg County. Turner was revoked on his probation issued on the Bess case and is currently incarcerated in the State Department of Corrections with an expected parole eligibility date of July 14th, 2023. I represented each of these young women and continue to represent Chloe Bess on the active appeal to the South Carolina Court of Appeals. Although the case involving Dallas Stoller was dismissed, I remain close with the Stoller family, as we all had hope that this case would possibly be reopened. After the media pressure surrounding the dismissal of Dallas Stoller's case and the plea agreement to probation in Chloe Bess's case, the Stoller family was contacted by the Second Circuit Solicitor's Office prosecuting these cases, indicating that they were looking at reopening the case and would investigate further. This was almost a year ago. And as of today, the state of South Carolina has not indicated whether they will reopen the case in which Dallas Stoller was a victim. I am honored to have Karl Stoller joining me today. He is the father of Dallas Stoller on Stepping Toward Justice. Karl has been an incredible advocate for Dallas and continues to be, not only for Dallas, but for victims in general. Karl, I appreciate you joining me. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. You know, over the past 5 years, we've gotten to know each other, and the tragedy that you and your family have experienced has been tremendous. And yet you were always ready to speak on behalf of your daughter, on behalf of victims, about what happened to you and your family and your daughter and how that all worked out in our justice system. You know, I knew your daughter for several years, and I know that she's so proud of you for continuing to speak out. This is probably a position that you never thought that you would be in, being a victim's advocate. That's definitely what I consider you.
No, ma'am, not at all. Didn't honestly ever think that would be the case, not at all. But happy to wish it were under different circumstances, obviously. But I'm glad to be speaking out on behalf of victims and trying to help improve that situation moving forward, if at all possible.
Absolutely. You and your family have mostly been quiet in the past year. Since there was the guilty plea with Bowen Turner in the case, the state versus Bowen Turner, involving Chloe Best, and your daughters last year, Brett, who will be joining us later, and Carly, really started a social media campaign of justice for Dallas, for Chloe, for her. Um, would you share a little bit about why y'all took a bit of a step back?
Um, One of the reasons we stepped back from the microphone, so to speak, was after meeting with the solicitor's office in the Second Judicial Circuit on Solicitor Weeks, approximately a year ago. I think that's somewhere close to that time frame. Um, he went back through the kind of a summarized version of what was going on and what had happened with Dallas's case, and to a degree, some of the other cases involved, the victims involved. Um, and explained that the pressure that his office was getting, and I think he got some personal derogatory statements thrown towards him and his family, and possibly some, I don't know, recall exactly, maybe some threats or whatever. And basically, he asked us just to, listen, we're looking back into this thing, and we're gonna we're gonna but we're gonna need a little help with getting some of the, I guess, the pressure off, the media side of it, to see, give us a chance to work, give us a chance to work,
And
and
y'all did that, right? I mean, we were
yes,
in a meeting together, and you did that, and that's been about a year.
correct, yeah, it's been about a year, yes,
And what about you know, we're still waiting for an answer, aren't we?
yes, absolutely, waiting very very anxiously to get something back on, and we recently did get a phone call, I think, or Zoom meeting, if I remember right, maybe 2 3 weeks ago, something like that, and that was, we went out, we got that phone call with Zoom meeting again. Once again, it was, I think I ended up having to get on the phone, and he, Mr. Weeks, went back through some history of what going on within his office in the last year towards trying to work to get something going with Dallas's case. And honestly, didn't sound like we were much further along than we were a year ago when we first talked. We did get some information from him that there was, his investigator had reached out to some folks, and they had talked to some of the witnesses involved at the time, and 4.5 years ago now, that have somewhat changed their statements or modified them. Didn't really um, back up, I guess, what they were saying initially. And then also a lot of focus on the fact that they wanted to one of the witnesses he spoke to, I think, supplied some video or whatever was taken that night at the party, and that Dallas attended. And hey, listen, we none of us, I don't think we ever made it a secret that Dallas was intoxicated when she was at this party. If we did, please forgive us, because we did not mean to hide that information. I don't think we did. But
You did not, and that we all know that being intoxicated, a victim being intoxicated, has absolutely nothing to do with a victim being raped.
right,
You know that because you're in law enforcement, but
correct,
we have heard a lot about that. Yes, sir.
correct. Well, and he went on to further elaborate on that. And he said, listen, the video showed her shotgunning beer and drinking hard liquor, and it was like the primary focus was on her. The whole conversation really centered around her being intoxicated. I didn't really hear much about, hey, this is what we're working on, but hey, this was part of what was disclosed. Not so much and how that would ultimately maybe affect or not affect one way or the other what was going on with Dallas' case. But it just seemed like heck, I don't believe, I don't know, 90% of the conversation was about that. I don't recall anything, and even as an investigator when he talked about it. And then the fact that too that the young men that he interviewed had kind of recanted some of their statements and changed up, or at the very least changed them a little bit. And these, we were surprised to hear that some video was this first time we'd heard of that. We had not heard anything about any videos prior. Of course, that I find that I wasn't shocked by that because honestly, quite frankly, it was handled so poorly out the gate. When it fell in their hands, it was just not. It was just not done right. It was that case seemed like it took a back seat from the beginning um, to trying to work towards any final conclusion or getting this thing to trial. And at least that's the way I saw it. And
Just to give some context, Karl, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but just to give some context, chronologically, Dallas was the second young woman to accuse Bowen Turner of sexual assault, and that was in October of 2018, and he wasn't charged until January of 2019.
that's correct. Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So there was already a delay with that investigation of almost 3 months before he was charged.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Good full 3 months before anybody was actually charged in the situation. That's right. Mm-hmm.
And what was your family going through at that point? I mean, this is someone that you knew, um, you know, small town, waiting for someone to be charged. There was no question of the identity of the alleged perpetrator.
No, not at all. Not at all. It wasn't like it was a lineup at the beginning trying to figure out
Right.
who was who. It was pretty much, she identified him from the start. So that's it. Law enforcement, everybody knew exactly who they were looking at, and law enforcement had prior knowledge of this young man's activities. And to my surprise, that he had been named in a case prior to. That was a night at the hospital when we were actually informed of that. But yeah, actually, that lag. Listen, Orangeburg is just what you said. It's a big county, but it's small. It's small in the people, and they, and especially going to school and private school there in Orangeburg, and the talk and the was like, well, he hasn't been charged because the case is unfounded. There's nothing to it. You get that kind of situation going on because people, initially they wanted to see an immediate result, but I had folks approach me and ask me why is it taking so long to get him charged. I said, well, and as you mentioned, I am in law enforcement, and I know it takes a little time in certain cases you have to do some investigation, and you don't just go immediately to the solicitor asking for a warrant and get this guy, girl, whatever the situation may be, arrested, and get that ball moving until you've got your probable cause set up. You've got the information that at least, which I mean, the burden for getting a warrant is lesser, as you know, than it is for actual an indictment, but that gets it moving. Okay. And a lot of folks with limited knowledge in that arena, I understand that. So I tried to explain it as much as I could to people who were approaching me about it, and how that process works, even though I did find it a little hard to explain after a while because it just took so long. And but nevertheless, it opened Dallas up to a lot of hits at school, and people obviously a small community, they're gonna draw lines in the sand. You got well-known family on his side, and I guess not as well known on our side, but a few people know us, and you get those lines drawn in the sand. People take sides, and then she's caught in the middle of that, and she
Right.
suffered pretty badly until it was actually done. And then once he was charged, then that snowball of misinformation and the waiting and the bullying and the ridicule, and then they said, well, they just did this because pressure or whatever. I mean, so who can
Right.
explain what people think?
Well, during that time before Turner was charged in this case involving Dallas, she actually went to school with him. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, Bowen
And
was.
so amid the bullying and the victim blaming and shaming and more that, you know, it came from a lot of folks who should have known better, including some in law enforcement, teachers, other people that really added that to that pressure for Dallas and the difficulty for your family.
Yes, yeah,
It's
that
just
was
unimaginable.
something which she would have never. Um, I don't think as a child she realized that she was 17 at the time, and she's. I still consider her a child. I don't think she was very prepared for what was coming her way. And honestly, to back up just a little bit, initially Dallas was very, very hesitant to do anything because she was old enough to know how the community is and how the area is, and she was concerned, and she was very concerned. She had seen it at school her entire school career. That's just the way that works. And it's not just at Orangeburg Prep; it's at other schools too. But I mean, it seems like it was a little more out front there. And when I remember sitting down with her and saying, when she was on that fence trying to decide what she needed to do. And I told her, I said, honey, I said, sometimes being on the right side of right is a very lonely place to be. And, there's times I've, really regretted honestly saying that to her because I think I put more of a burden on her than she can handle. And there's plenty of times I wish I could have taken it back if I'd have known what was coming down the line. And so I feel that responsibility for putting her in that spot, I guess. I don't, but at the same time, there's another side of me that says, hey, this is the way I was raised and the way I tried to raise my girls. And said, listen, it's tough, it's hard, and again, it'll be in a lonely spot, and I just had no idea it'd be quite that bad.
You know, I've seen you with all three of your girls over the years, and I came to meet y'all in a very terrible time. But I can say without any amount of hesitation in my voice, Karl, you're an excellent dad, an excellent advocate, and you've always, always done the right thing for your girls. And, you know, I think about what has happened with this case and what has happened with Dallas and the tragedy that has come from this. And it's startling the effects that community or the lack of support from the community really had on this particular case, with very, very tragic circumstances. Very,
Right,
very tragic circumstances.
absolutely.
You know, how do you think our community, advocates, survivors, just regular people who may be listening, how can we have done better? How can we do better? Because we can't go back, but we can move forward. We can try to change things in the future. How can we change that, in your opinion, as a dad of a sexual assault survivor, as someone who's in law enforcement? What can we do better?
I think people could make a more concerted effort to understand situations. Maybe you need to maybe we need to educate folks better. Not in us in for the law enforcement side. Maybe we should get out and be more out front with it and say, hey, listen, people, yeah, there's victims, plenty of victims, but there's also people that are legitimate victims, but there's also victims that aren't really legitimate, so those are the ones that bring doubt to people's mind. And for some reason in sexual assault cases, that has always been the case. As long as I can remember, it's always been um, tough. But understanding that folks are going through a really tough time, and hey, you may not be on the side of the victim. I mean, everybody. Hey, listen, there's going to be people that are going to stand up for the defendant. That's human nature. But educate yourself and try to do a little better job of supporting everyone. And if that means keeping your mouth shut, keep it shut. Goes back to that old saying: if you don't have anything good to say, probably a good idea just not to say anything. And that applies to a multitude of things throughout life, but especially in this situation. But I think that in your position as a victim's rights attorney and somebody who's really pushing for it, they do. And I know, not saying you guys are not trying to get the word out there, but getting folks to listen to your side of it too, to understand that victims, they are really truly real victims out there. And I think that's a good portion of it is trying to get people to understand and saying, hey, if you just can't say anything good, let's try to keep it amongst your circle or get it out there. But unfortunately, nowadays with social media and the way things are now, the information is so free flowing. So I honestly don't know how to defeat that.
It's tough because there are no easy answers here. There really aren't.
No.
We've heard so much about the good old boy system. We heard about the good old boy system with the Alec Murdaugh case. We heard about the good old boy system with the Bowen Turner case, and the reasons why it allowed him to receive the recommendation from the state and the best case. How he was, given an offer of probation, and the case was pled down. What do you think of the good old boy system and how it affects justice in South Carolina and beyond? Really, it's not just a South Carolina thing; it's an everywhere thing.
You're absolutely correct. It's everywhere. To it's just not our state. It's everywhere. You're right. But in our state, for some reason, it seems to be, I don't know, maybe because we're a small state. I don't know. Maybe it just seems a little more out front because we are a small state. But listen, I grew up in I've been around this system for quite a long time. Many people probably don't know this. My father was agent in charge of probation parole in Bamberg County for many, many years. And I was afforded the opportunity to, as a young man or boy, if you will, to be right around a lot of those players. And like in the Alec Murdaugh situation, his grandfather, his father, when I was a young guy, exposed to those folks. And I have to admit, I also something that left a little part out here that's important. I actually used to draw the juries I was the jury boy for Bamberg at one time, and I was mesmerized by that court system and going in our courtroom. I thought Bamberg County Courthouse was the biggest courthouse in the state. And it was seeing those attorneys work and those solicitors, and I was very impressed by that. And but I also heard in that capacity and around my father, there's a lot of things that went on behind the scenes. and that's where that good old boy system was there before his time too. But it goes from one generation to the next. And so I guess in a sense you could kind of say I was a little part of it, and actually I wanted to. Hey, I was again I was impressed by this story. Thought it was kind of amusing to hear about some of the deals that got pulled, and if you knew the right people, things would kind of work out. If you're a defendant and you didn't know the right people, you were gonna probably end up in jail. And it was I had a lifetime of it. And and there was a time again. I bought into it, and then as I got older, I realized I started really thinking about it, and with conversations with Daddy after he retired, um, and I questioned some things, and I don't know that he necessarily liked all my questions, but I guess I started thinking a little more freely for myself, and I started thinking, listen, that just wasn't right. Um, that isn't right. Or hearing about something that was coming up, I was thinking, wow, it's going to be it's amazing how that case is going to be manipulated because this attorney is involved in it, this law firm is involved in it, this solicitor is involved in it. Just those kind of things. I know I'm all over the place with it, but still, it does speak to what you're asking me. And that system is thriving, and it still goes on today. And I do find it very amusing how quickly in the Murdoch case is one that just obviously jumps out at you is how quickly when they can't cover up for one of their people, when they can't, one of the old boys can't get the blanket coverage, which he did for a long time. When he gets outside of it, it's funny how quickly they turn on. How it turns the other way, and how quickly they are to say, "Hey, let's see him. We're going to take him down." And I kind of have to laugh about that a little bit, and then seeing some of the ones that got up in there and testified, and knowing that they're just as tied in as he was or more so, and how they hey, listen, I'm helping the state out with this. I'm he's got to be things got to be handled with Alec. It's and but what's in it for me? What's the deal in me? Because I'm not clean here either, and I just want to make sure I don't end up in jail. You know, and so people can argue that I'm right about that or wrong. I don't know, but I can tell you, I lived it. I've seen it, and I know some of the players, the key players in there, and there's a lot of information that got piped through there that probably would just save their own rear ends. So that's
Yeah.
that's how that system works, man. That's how it works.
And it's definitely something that we continue to see that's oftentimes, I say this all the time, Carl, and you've heard me say it. We're dealing with a system for victims that did not even entertain, did not even consider victims when we established our current judicial system. Victims were an afterthought, and trying to fight for a place for victims, not only for place, but to try and center them in this process is really, really difficult because you have those people that have held on to power for so long, and have, you know, anything new is something bad oftentimes. And I think that that's one of the reasons why, I've always thought that your daughter Dallas was not treated fairly, not inside the courtroom, not outside the courtroom. She was not treated fairly. Um, you know, what do you think would improve that? What do you think that would help improve our system? Knowing that there is this hold on from the good old boy system, there has been this hold. Um, you were privy to it, and your family was treated the way that you all were. Um,
Right.
what would you see to improve our system?
Well, I know we always so it all goes back to this. We keep talking about it. The only way you're going to end that, the only way you're going to end it, or even begin to end it, is you got to make changes at certain levels. And unfortunately, whether and this is nothing personal. I mean, this is just and hey, so use the old phrase, it's just business. Okay. Um, Listen, you got to make changes. folks need to, if they're not up for the job and they're not willing to um, go after a case wholeheartedly, or they're letting influence, outside influence, weigh greatly on their decision whether to move forward with something or not, then it just means at this point in time you either been there too long, or you're just trying to hold on to a position because it's probably an elected position, and you just you're not ready to give it up for whatever reason. But the way we fix that is, folks have just got to listen to what everybody in multiple news outlets like Fitz News is saying. Well, folks are very well spoken and very educated on this matter. Mandy Matney is another one that comes to mind. It's a battle that's going to you guys. You got to, the power lies within every citizen of this state who is registered to vote. If you just wake up and you pay attention to what's going on right now, and it's happened in cases recently, like the one that comes immediately to mind is this guy who's a gangster that just got released from prison, and through some backyard deals going on.
Right, the Gerard Price
Yeah,
case.
yes,
Yeah.
and I don't think that that's. I think that judge twisted that in his favor, and listen, his there's representation that steps in on some of that stuff. With this back to the lawyer legislator thing, and then you got state senators such as Senator Hutto in our case, that's claimed to be such champions of rights and victims' rights, women's rights as a whole. And then, hey, listen, he's defending his client. I get it. And then I guess it's his job to try to discredit the key witness in a situation being the victim as much as they possibly can to get the best deal possible for their client or ultimately get an acquittal. But, you know, go back to a little bit about, again, in reference to what you're asking me, I don't know that they need to, people got to understand, citizens have got to understand the power lies within you, with your ability to vote. Know those candidates, know what they stand for, know what they don't stand for. And if that aligns with or doesn't align with your thinking, then cast your vote to get them out of there. And there should be things like term limits put on and acted too, because people get in a comfortable position, and especially an elected position, and they stay there so long, and then they start wielding so much influence and power, and then things just get a little distorted, if you will, and that's where it leads to. After meeting with Attorney General Wilson last year, I used the word corruption, and I think he took a little bit of exception to that. But because he asked me, "What do you mean corruption?" A strong word. Well, I think it aligns perfectly with what we're dealing with. I mean, there's corrupt situations, and in our situation, I can't prove this, but I do know I had a deputy solicitor that's been seeking a circuit court judgeship for a long, long time, and having Senator Hutto in his pocket or in his corner would be a big stepping stone towards successfully getting appointed to the bench. So that may or may not have had the case, but it certainly, if nothing else, when you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together, it certainly lends itself towards a situation that could be construed as, "Hey, you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours." And again, that's kind of how our little system works here in the state.
It certainly doesn't pass the smell test, does it?
It doesn't.
When you've got people that are appearing in front of judges, and those are the very people that elect our judges in the legislature. Our lawyer legislators do not recuse themselves from that vote, so they're electing the judges that they will appear in front of for however long that judge is on the bench. The makeup of our judicial merit selection committee is pretty much all lawyer legislators. I think there's one space on there for a private citizen.
Yeah, that
Um,
token citizen. That's what I call it, the token citizen. Yeah, just to make it look good.
it, and these things that your family has seen how it doesn't work, how the way that we elect judges doesn't work, how lawyer legislators being able to put off cases for 6, 7, 8, sometimes 9 months out of a year, giving really a 3-month window to try all the cases in which they represent somebody. That doesn't really work. I mean, in Dallas's case, it was years, years.
Correct. And then you had the COVID situation that jumped up, and I think they used that to their full advantage. But it's also my understanding too that Senator Hutto had many cases that were presented during that time frame, and he worked right on through them. But I think he used that between his position in the Senate and COVID. I think that was a lot of he used that as a reason to not move forward quite a bit. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I do know that his senatorial duties were used a lot. Kept putting it off, and it's weird how all of a sudden, after not long after Dallas's death, and the threat of once these bond violations of Bowen Turner's came to light, how quick he was. Let's go on and try to get this thing disposed of. And I found that pretty interesting because, of course, Dallas was deceased at the time, so we knew that her case at best was a long, long shot, even out, and it was dismissed at the time. Still is, but it was dismissed for sure. And then, that seemed weird in and of itself, how we wanted to accelerate that process, and let's go on and get, once it was put into paper, which was nothing but a dog. My favorite thing to say, a dog and pony show for Solicitor Miller, Deputy Solicitor Miller, to say, "Hey, listen, I'm going at you with both my 6 guns. Your client violated his conditions of bond, and I'm going after him." And then 4 weeks later, we're sitting in a bond hearing. I said, no, I'm sorry, not a bond hearing, but a hearing in Orangeburg County was supposed to be a bond revocation hearing that turned into a plea deal, acceptance of a plea deal. And give you a little bit of insight on that, which you fully know how that all went down. The solicitor, Deputy Solicitor Miller and Senator Hutto knew a month ahead that those fully knew that, because they had the printouts right in front of them, all the 50 plus bond violations. And according to the judge's order, and it reads verbatim, once you gain knowledge that he has violated the conditions of his bond, he is supposed to be taken into custody immediately, and it emphasized immediately. So our expectation would have been the day he came to court for what turned out to be that plea hearing was to come in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, because he should have been in the custody of the Orangeburg County Detention Center at that point. And he didn't come in that way. He came in with a polo shirt, a blazer, and khakis, and I think that, we tried that. You made the presentation to Judge Markley Dennis, or the argument, or posed the argument that why, basically is a summary of why isn't this the case. And he said, well, that's not what we're here to hear today. We're not about that. I'm under the impression I was here to hear a plea agreement. So, and then further find out later on during.
And that's the basis of our appeal. I just want to say that's part of our appeal.
Yeah.
That's currently pending. We have an appeal at the South Carolina Court of Appeals.
Yeah.
So we were not heard on a lot of things, and that we did file some appeals there.
Right.
So,
but Sarah too, and it goes up, and I don't want to take too much of the floor or more time, but it speaks to, I spoke of recent events and the influence that's wielded in not just Orangeburg County but across the state. But this one is another one that came up in Orangeburg County recently, where a subject was accused of disseminating sexually explicit material to a minor, and an Orangeburg County magistrate attempted to dismiss that case back in the last year, I think so, and he totally stepped outside of his lane. He didn't even have the authority to rule on that. That was a preliminary hearing. It was nothing to do with discovery. He argued that his attorney that was representing the guy argued that the discovery had not been provided by the sheriff's office, which, by the way, is not the job of the sheriff's office. That's the job of the solicitor's office. And it's less than some minor traffic offense or some minor lower level case, but anyway, he wouldn't even hear our investigator ask for time to find out where that discovery request was, or try to provide the information that the so-called defense attorney needed. He had a personal relationship with the judge. The magistrate had a personal relationship with the defense attorney. Used to be his law partner, former stepfather. All of the above. Did not disclose any of that information, and anyway, moved to dismiss the case. He did. He dismissed it, but thankfully David Pasco got it for the grand jury, and that guy's indicted now. But that's just an example of how easily things get twisted around, and that's that connection piece, and how they, and to my knowledge, there's going to be no disciplinary action taken against that magistrate, even though he was wrong. But Senator Hutto appointed him, and I think, and I'm going to summarize a little bit of what I took from his statements about it. He said, "Hey, I just appoint them. I don't police them after they get in there, and I don't take any responsibility for him or another one making a bad decision. I just put them in there. I just appoint them until y'all find a better way to do it. We'll keep doing that." That's and listen, that was a coward's response. Hey, you appointed the guy, stand up for him, or don't stand up for him. Do something about it because it's within your authority to do something about it, but you do nothing. You do nothing but say, "Hey, I'm hands off of it." So that's the way I look at that thing. And then all these crazy bonds. And as a law enforcement officer, it's really frustrating. I stand hard with the sheriff and solicitors across the state saying this bond, bond, bond. Every time, let's give them bond, let's give them bond. And then, and then they're reoffending within a week, or hell, in some cases less, that day. And they're right back in front of the judge again to be released again. And that's some of that's due to influence, and some of that's just due to I don't know why, but I know it is frustrating. I know it is frustrating, and it's frustrating for victims. I know when I go to calls, I take calls to the sheriff's office, and I go there, and I have victims of domestic violence. I have victims of different other crimes, several things, and they look at me and they tell me, "Listen, I know what's not going to happen. I know you want to try to help me, and we do. We definitely do. But they point blank tell you, I know what's not going to happen, and I'm going to face the wrath. You arrest them tonight or today, tomorrow they're going to be back home. They're going to be back on the street, and God knows I don't know if you can get to me in time. And it's really upsetting because I can't tell them that's not going to be the case. Because the truth of the matter is, it is going to be the case. And some victims have paid the ultimate price for going forward. That includes my own daughter.
It's absolutely heartbreaking because I know that you've been quote unquote in the system, but you've also been on outside of the system, and it's got to be tough drawing attention to things and being critical of the investigation in Dallas's case, for instance, or these situations where you're taking call and you know you're trying to make it home. Defendants will make it home. They'll be bonded out and home before you are even off of your shift.
Yes.
And to know that and still respond to those calls and to still try to advocate, it's heartbreaking because there are no easy answers on how we can fix it, other than to draw attention that these things are actually happening. These things happen every day.
Every day. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Every day. So I want to shift to the meeting that you had with the Second Circuit Solicitor's Office, where you learned some videos were never discovered until just really a couple of weeks ago, that were never gotten during the investigation from SLED. Um, what is your sense, Karl, of what's going to happen? We met with them a year ago, met with them rather recently. What is your sense of where this is headed?
I think, well, what I sense, and based on that conversation recently with their office, I don't think anything's going to happen. I think that they're going to that they were just softening it up for us to let us know how intoxicated Dallas was and how bad she put herself in a position to be assaulted or raped. She is basically, to me, the way that what I took on it was, hey, put yourself in this spot, okay? And we're just trying to let you guys know that your daughter messed up and she put herself in this spot. And I think that's to soften the blow of what we already anticipating as a family is that we're not going to be able to move forward, or we don't think we have a winnable case we can, or anything we can present to the grand jury that we get a true bill back on. And and we just to use Deputy Assistant Miller's words at the time, back when this other stuff came up that ultimately led to Bowen's plea agreement. I'm just not going to waste 12 jurors' time or mine any more of my time to fight for a case I can't win. Well, if you'd done a better job up front, maybe you would have had a case you could win, or at least a case you could present. And now I just don't see where that's going to work out because again, you have is too long, just drawn out. You're saying these videos exist. They weren't discovered to begin with. God knows why. And you just, again, you're just trying to say, I did ask for something during one of my speeches or one of my talks that said, listen, I just want to see an effort. I want to see you guys try to do something. And maybe that's what they're doing. They're fulfilling my request to at least try and say, hey, man, Carl, we tried. We're not going to acknowledge that we failed to begin with, and we failed you, we failed your family. Most importantly, you failed my daughter, the victim, and these other girls, and the countless of other victims that they apparently failed. I mean, got a guy sitting over in Bamber County right now on 2 years of house arrest for multiple counts of sexual contact towards children because of a flub up in that office. And again, you're gonna reelect that office. You're gonna get that office because I asked in that meeting. You were right there with me. I said, hey, I told Solicitor Weeks, I said, if I had a guy like that, I don't care if he's done a million things right in his career. There's one thing with all the things that it implies, all the irregularities it implies, that you're gonna hold on to that guy. And he angrily said, you must be kidding me if you think I'm gonna fire this guy. Well, if I had somebody working for me that represented me that way, I could promise you they would not have a job. They would not have a job. I wouldn't want that guy. And then he turns around and does it again. In this case that I mentioned with the guy who got 2 years of house arrest, connected the same way. So, it's just frustrating. So, yes, I think nothing is going to happen but saying, hey, Carl, Carl, your family, we made that effort. Sarah, we made that effort, gave it the old try, but it just didn't work out. And we're sorry. We're sorry. Well, it's too late to be sorry. That's my take.
Carl, I think that so often, victims and, folks that work with victims, we want to be cooperative with law enforcement and with prosecution because we have that hope that things are gonna be, um, taken seriously, that people are going to do a good job in investigation, that they're going to successfully prosecute it the best way that they possibly can. And so it's difficult to draw attention to those points where it's like, this is not working. We're not seeing the best effort here. We're not seeing that. And you've been very vocal about that. And I know that um, it's difficult to even understand how people can look at this particular case or even some of the other ones that you talked about and say, I feel good about what I did here. I think I did a good job. Um, and for me, the only way that we make change, the only way that we can have some accountability in all of this is by saying, this is what happened. This is what happened. This was my experience. Maybe this wasn't someone else's experience, but this was my experience. And you leading the charge on that always, Carl, because it's not easy to do. It's not easy to do.
No, it's not. But I do want to say this. there's multiple times, and again, because I am in law enforcement, people are going to say, well, he's just saying that because he's one of them. I'm not one of them all the time. That's not my full time career, but I do know that law enforcement works very hard in multiple cases to give those offices everything they need to work with to try to gain a prosecution and get justice for victims and their families. And many times, the solicitor's offices use, well, the poor work of the law enforcement agency is the reason that this happened. That we had to cut a deal, but you listen. That might happen from time to time, but listen, you pick up the paper and you see these sentences that are handed down time and time and time again for serious offenses that end up on probation or nothing going on. And then bond, and you go back to the bond situation, you grant bond over and over and over again. And then, like in this case, in Dallas's case, again, everybody full well knows, I would think they do. They argued to have that first ankle monitor removed from the defendant, Mr. Turner, and then got it successfully pulled off, got it taken off in 41 days. 41 days he reoffends the Chloe Best case, and then they put him back on it. And we don't want him to have to go to DJJ and et cetera and so on. Come on, man, that's that's just ridiculous, and that's just a snippet of what went on in our situation. Can you imagine or what's going on with all these cases and it is hard. It's difficult, and on the law enforcement side, to sit there and listen to folks say, "I just, know you want to try, but there's nothing you can do to help me because it's not the court doesn't have your back," um, and um, and that's true. But I am proud once again to see multiple sheriffs across the state and even prosecutors or solicitors in our case that's reaching out and trying to work towards a form of judicial reform that makes sense. I know it's not going to be an easy answer, but to echo what you just said a minute ago, keep speaking out. I think that's key because people are really taking notice. They're really taking notice. They're seeing it, Sarah. They're seeing that what you're fighting for, what we're fighting for as a family, and they're seeing what other families are fighting for, and people are taking note. And I really think that it's going to be unfortunate for some of these politicians, but they're going to have to step aside, and another fresh face is going to have to come in there. And I really think that's happening. I think that age is dawning because people are educated now, and getting more and more educated every day. That the representation, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, what your skin color is, or any of that. People, just the everyday ordinary citizen, is understanding that hey, none of this is working for anybody, and we got to make some changes.
Carl, what do you want people to know about Dallas? How do you want Dallas to be remembered?
I want Dallas to be remembered for being the kind, big-hearted person she always was. That big smile, that smile that as I'm sitting here talking to you right now, looking at a photo of her right now in our office here at home, that big, beautiful smile, and how much she wanted the world to just really. She was truly a sincere person and wanted everybody to love one another and to have and that smile of hers couldn't bring on a big shining light to the world, and she would be disappointed. But she fought a lot of obstacles, and she even as a young child and moving forward into young adulthood, and I wanted her to be remembered for being the kind and gentle soul she was, and I hope maybe that's rubbed off on a few folks. So in the last few years, and especially in the last year or so since we heading towards 2 years since we lost her, and because she really loved people, she really did, and sometimes I fear that her deep affection for people is what cost her ultimately. But it's okay if that's what it's got to be, then that's what it's got to be. But hopefully, what we're all fighting for too, as a final note to that, Sarah, um, is what we're all trying to stand. Her sisters and her mom and myself and you and others who are fighting that battle that maybe, our sacrifice or our family sacrifice is a catalyst for real change in the state. And if Dallas can be a part of that, and it's good for people moving forward and victims in the future, then yes, to a degree, it was worth it.
I have no doubt that, Dallas thought better of other people, even people that she knew um, didn't have her interest at heart. She always thought the best of others. And I think about that on a daily basis, because I was blessed to know Dallas and to know her kind spirit, and to always look at things from another person's perspective, to not always take our feelings the way that we're looking at it as the gospel, but think about it from someone else's perspective. And I think about her and that lesson that I learned from her regularly. And in the work that I'm blessed to do, I think of the things that we do in a courtroom. We're getting ready to do the Victims Matter rally on May 9th coming up, and you're going to be one of our speakers there. For me, it's all a legacy of Dallas. She's will never be forgotten because this is her legacy, the legacy of a father who has taken this mission, not something that you would have ever wanted, but you have taken this, and calling people out for what has happened, no longer pushing things under the rug, which is exactly what the good old boy system wants us to do. Let's hush. We'll talk about it later. Let's be quiet. But calling people out and asking for accountability, demanding accountability for victims. Well, I'm proud to know both of your girls, and you and Michelle. I I appreciate you coming on to talk about this, because I know it's not easy, but it's so important to talk about our system, the things that work and the things that don't work. We've got to look at things realistically, and you giving your perspective here today, Karl, I think is really powerful, and hopefully we'll have a few people thinking, all right, I'm thinking about that a little bit differently. And, for sometimes the justice that we're looking for doesn't always come inside of a courtroom.
Correct.
Sometimes that justice comes from outside that courtroom. And we'll keep pushing on all the angles that we can to find justice for Dallas and for all victims. So thank you for being here, Karl.
You're very welcome. And I know you'll keep fighting. Thank you, Sarah.